o presidente da República, Michel Temer, acompanhado do presidente
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to invite for the opening ceremony of the event Mrs. Susan Siegel, President and CEO of the American Society Council of the Americas. Good morning. I would like to thank the attendance of all of you and to say that we are very pleased to be in Brazil today.
In Brazil hoje. And now I'm going to English because you'll understand me much better. And those of you that don't have great translation. Michel Temer, President of Brazil. Ilan Gofar, não sei se está aqui, Governor of the Central Bank. Aloncio Núñez Ferreira, Minister of Foreign Affairs. Diogo Oliveira, Minister of Planning and Development Management. Marcos Pereira, Minister of Industry, Foreign Trade and Services. Wellington Moreira Franco, Minister General of Secretariat of the Presidency. Fernando Coelho Filho, Minister of Mines and Energy. Mi querido amigo José Sá, former President of Brazil. Ambassadors and other members of the diplomatic community, America's Society Council of the Americas members, and other special guests. I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you here today with us today, and I want to welcome everyone tuning in online through our webcast. I want to give a very special welcome and thank you to Ambassador Roberto Jaguaribe and his team in Brazil, at Apex Brazil, for their support of this event. Roberto, thank you so much. It's a wonderful partnership, and we look forward to continuing it. Finally, many thanks to my team, particularly Natalia, Diogo, and Rebecca. When President Temer visited the Council of the Americas in New York City last September, we discussed bringing investors to Brasilia to have a conversation about investment opportunities that exist in the country today. And Mr. President, here we are. The Council of the Americas has always gone to Sao Paulo or Rio de Janeiro for our Latin American cities conferences. And while we will continue to do so, in fact, we will be in Sao Paulo in May, it has become apparent to us that much of the conversation in Sao Paulo is business to business, and our organization is about a broader dialogue which includes a strong discussion between the public and private sectors. As it is in the US, important to go to Washington, D.C. to have an understanding of and do business in the country, so it is equally important in Brazil to go to Brasilia, the center of government, to engage with key public sector officials. As we all know, understanding public policy decisions and being able to interpret the nuances from timely discussions is critical to building confidence, which is at the heart of almost every investment decision. There are many things happening in Brazil today. It is possible that we are standing on the verge of a new era of economic growth and development. Many investors have been encouraged by the commitment of the President and his economic team, led by Minister Michel, to taking the long-awaited critical decisions. These decisions seek to implement new economic reforms to balance the budget and lay the groundwork for the Brazilian economy to grow and perform at its full potential. The New York Times recently highlighted the lineup of initial public offerings on the stock market for this year after a 3-year drought of almost no IPOs. According to this article, bankers expect between 10 and 15 IPOs in 2017. It is an impressive list across sectors, 2 of which have already happened, 2 IPOs which have already happened. And I predict huge interest from international investors, further highlighting the diversity of opportunity in the country and the cautious optimism among investors. But access to the equity in markets is also important as it represents liquidity, which encourages additional investment in even less sectors, less liquid sectors, such as infrastructure, one of the major projects and opportunities today in Brazil. In many ways, Brazil and the hemisphere are at a crossroads, but this is an opportunity, not a negative. The changing political, economic reality in my country represents a real and unique opportunity for Latin America to enhance commerce among themselves, which is very low compared to, for example, to the European Union. To build infrastructure that will integrate and connect Latin American countries, and of course, make all of Latin America more competitive, which will in turn create more growth and employment, as we all know. Under the leadership of Presidents Temer and Macri, Mercosur is finally working towards greater opening, economic integration, and enhanced trade ties within Mercosur. But the new vision for Mercosur is also yielding discussions with Europe, the Pacific Alliance, and other parts of the world, which is very welcomed by the international community. So the Council of the Americas in Brasilia today is what we do across the hemisphere: catalyze and enhance dialogue between the public and private sectors as a means to encourage and facilitate investment. This kind of communication is more critical today than ever as we live in an interesting time in history and an important moment for our hemisphere. Yesterday, David Rockefeller, our founder and honorary chairman, passed away. He leaves many legacies as a great statesman, leader transcending all borders, and of course, a philanthropist who loved the arts. As we celebrate his life, although it is sad, it is a celebration as he died at 101 years old. I think about what he stood for over his lifetime. He loved Latin America, and he traveled to Latin America often and came to Brazil many, many times. He came to Brazil with the Council of the Americas Society the last time, probably about 7 or 8 years ago, and believed deeply in hemispheric integration, trade, shared prosperity, and a common cultural heritage. As we look around the hemisphere, his values and legacy are especially relevant today. So I want to say thank you to everyone that has worked with us. We are thrilled to be in Brasilia today. I look forward to the conference, and thank you, President Temer, for joining us, and we hope to see you again in New York, and I look forward to your comments. Thank you very much.
Muito obrigada, Susan. E em continuidade à cerimônia de abertura...
Thank you, Mrs. Segal. Continuing the opening ceremony, I would like to invite Ambassador Alberto Jaguaribe, President of the Brazilian Trade and Investment Promotion Agency, Apex Brazil. Your Excellency, President of the Republic, Michel Temer, President José Sarney, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Aloysio Nunes, Minister of Industry, Foreign Trade and Services, Marcos Pereira, Minister for Mines and Energy, Fernando Filho, my friend Susan Siegel, President and CEO of the American Society. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome to Brasilia. When I was informed that Susan and the members of the American Society had chosen Brasilia to host the Latin American Cities Conferences, it seemed to me a very timely choice. Brazil is going through a very important, a key moment in its history under the leadership of President Temer. And so coming to see close up what is going on in Brazil is a very clear way of means of assessing the potential of this nation. The attendance of the President of the Republic and his ministers is a clear sign of the relevance that Brazil confers to foreign relations and its relations with the US and with the hemisphere. And it's also a sign of the importance given to foreign investments and the opening promoted in the country so that we can recover sustained growth and guarantee for Brazilians the employments and the remuneration that they deserve. And so for Apex Brazil, it is an honor to have contributed and helped the Council of the Americas in the organization of this event. The agency has the mission of assisting foreign investors in Brazil, and we are here. All of our team is permanently at your disposal, at the disposal of all investors and all those who have an interest in Brazil, or all those in Brazil that are interested in investing in the US. In the surveys and polls that we conduct with investors in Brazil, US is still the preferred destination for Brazilian companies abroad, and the intention of investing in the US and promoting Brazilian business in the US is still very much alive. And due to the interest in promoting investments in Brazil, the President of the Republic has determined the organization of a major investment event on the 30th and 31st of May in São Paulo, and you are all invited to this event, and the President will also speak at the opening of that event. I don't want to take too long, but I would like to support Susan Segal's words when she mentions President Rockefeller, honorary president of the Americas Society. I had the opportunity to meet him when I was a child in Boston. My father was a professor at the university there, and so having been instructed directly by President Temer, I would like you all to stand up for a minute of silence in honor of this citizen who contributed so much to society, to our societies. Thank you.
Obrigado.
Muito obrigada, embaixador.
Thank you, Ambassador Jaguaribe. Ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor of inviting the President of the Republic, Michel Temer, for the opening speech of this conference. Thank you.
Eu quero começar cumprimentando a senhora Susan Segal pela oportunidade.
First and above all, I'd like to start out by thanking Madam Susan Segal for the outstanding opportunity to hold this meeting in Brazil. As she very aptly indicated in her introductory remarks, at her invitation, we've met before a few times at the Council of the Americas in New York, and sessions have always been attended by an extremely and highly interested audience. And not only myself, but also former President Sarney, cabinet ministers, and other members of our delegation have always had a chance to, of course, disseminate information about Brazil. So greetings, Madam Segal, for the opportunity to again in Brazil. Greetings likewise to my dear friend, President José Sarney, dear friend, Cabinet Minister Aloysio Nunes, Cabinet Minister Marcos Pereira, Ambassador and friend Hélio Jaguaribe, Mr. Fernando Filho. Greetings extensive to all. And may I use the opportunity to say and call to mind, as mentioned by Ambassador Jaguaribe, may I call to mind the very important role performed by the founding father of the Council of the Americas. He has been honored with a minute of silence on our part today, but I'd like to again say so officially on behalf of the Brazilian government and say just how sorry we are for his passing away. May I also say that the past few days has been marked by an agenda largely devoted to the U.S. On Saturday, for instance, I got a phone call from incumbent president of the U.S., Mr. Donald Trump, who uttered outstanding interest in engaging in political, cultural, industrial economic relations between Brazil and the US. He placed a great deal of emphasis to this ongoing interaction, relationship, if you will, between Brazil and the US. By way of coincidence, I had been invited by President Hélio Jaguaribe to join him at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, AmCham, in São Paulo, where a new council was established. Greetings likewise to the U.S. ambassador, incidentally. And during that session yesterday, I had the chance to address a very qualified audience, in big numbers, by the way. And again today, I have another chance to address members of the business community of the Council of the Americas. So it gives me great pleasure to attend and open this event. Ms. Susan Siegel herself listed some of the government actions that have been undertaken to ensure we come out of the recession which we have exited, as well as efforts aimed at ensuring economic growth, which we have all espoused and embraced and are so focused upon. But may I address a topic which is so very key to everyone? Actually, ever since Saturday, I have been addressing this matter, to a certain extent perhaps tiring those who have heard me more than once on this same point. But I'm essentially talking about the measures around animal protein or meat products exported from Brazil into foreign countries, including the U.S. Actually, in the U.S., we have Brazilian companies headquartered in the U.S. and doing business, and Brazilian meat products have always been exalted and much praised by those, of course, whose taste buds like meat products. And I'm sure you know that in the past few days there has been some alarm or a sense of alarm surrounding Brazilian meat products or products of animal origin produced in and exported from Brazil. And of course I could not fail to indicate just how uncomfortable we become with that from an economic perspective. A few countries have actually thought of suspending their procurement from Brazil of meat products, but I understand South Korea has actually gone back. They had thought of doing so yesterday, suspending procurement of meat products from Brazil, but have gone back and lifted the apparent suspension precisely as a result of a prompt response on the part of the Brazilian high-ranking government officials, but more importantly because of the fully fledged and thorough clarification that has been provided and the factual information disseminated. May I take the liberty of sharing a few facts and figures with you to show you just how insignificant those events were. And of course, I'm not saying that we should turn a blind eye to those events, because if there has been any misconduct or wrongdoing and misconduct should be looked into and ascertained properly. And of course, they should be punishable as appropriate, following a closer look, and as was the case with a few civil servants working with the Ministry of Agriculture who just yesterday were promptly dismissed from office by Cabinet Minister Blairo Maggi, the Minister of Agriculture. Let me quote a few figures by way of illustration. I don't mean to tire you, however. We have about 4,383 plants, meat packing plants operating in Brazil. Out of these 4,383 meat packing plants, only 3 were or had their operations suspended as a result of recent investigations, which were very properly conducted, and another 18/19 such plans are currently being looked into. That's point number one. Point number two, the Ministry of Agriculture has 11,300 civil servants. Only 30 of them are currently being investigated, not to mention those who yesterday were dismissed from office as a result of very prompt and effective action by the federal government. One more piece of information. In the past 6 months, we have sent out 870,000 consignments that were exported with Brazilian meat products or animal protein products abroad. Out of them, only 184 consignments were re-examined, and re-examined not as a result of sanitary issues, but rather labeling, packaging details. Out of 850,000 plus meat product consignments exported out of Brazil. I'm just providing this information to you by way of introduction, ladies and gentlemen, because this point is really key for Brazil. One of the, pillars pillars of the Brazilian economy is agribusiness and livestock, cattle raising. So we cannot possibly turn a blind eye or allow alarmist news to circulate, since they do not at all affect a majority of Brazilian slaughterhouses or meat packing plants. Actually, on Sunday, early in the afternoon, I held a meeting with the relevant cabinet ministers involved in the matter at hand. And soon after, I held a meeting with Association of Producers of Products of Animal Origin, and then a meeting with ambassadors from several different importing countries that, of course, purchase and consume Brazilian meat products. And very healthily, we ended up the session in a barbecue restaurant. We all, of course, were able to enjoy Brazilian meat. And it's not imported meat, as someone has said before. It was Brazilian meat, and very good one indeed. I'm saying this, ladies and gentlemen, because these issues have to be made plain and clear. Actually, yesterday I was told that Brazil is by tradition an oral country. It is not enough to write. You have to speak. You have to repeat and hammer on and emphasize, stress, underscore, stress again, reaffirm. Because Brazil is by definition, by tradition, an oral country. Because if you don't speak about things, people may read an article about a given matter but not attach too much importance to it. So again, as I was saying before in stress now, it gives me great pleasure to attend this meeting with you, Madam Segal, especially given the fact that I have, again, a chance to address a very special audience, which I'm sure, given your stature, you are in a position to, of course, replicate what I'm saying. So I made a point of addressing this point to begin with. And obviously, those of you who can and wish and are in a position to invest in Brazil, I'm sure you are totally in a position to do so, as indicated by Ambassador Jaguaribe yesterday. And as you know, I've been in office for the past 6 months, but despite this short time span, we have achieved more than reasonable feats, such as, for example, and as mentioned before, the dropping inflation rate. It used to be 10.7 early in the year, whereas now, or early last year, whereas we came to the end of the year with no more than 6.29 by way of inflation rate. In other words, below the target of, or below the ceiling of the target, which was 6%. So today, inflation runs at about 5%, which means that in the course of the year, we will quite certainly come way below the center of the target, which is 4.5%, all of which is the result of a very responsible economic policy, which brings along with it, as I'm sure you know, a parallel drop in the Selic reference banking rate, which has been considerably lowered, and which of course translates into lower interest rates. I'm always very cautious when I refer to this fact, but I do think that we do have the forerunning elements for a scenario where perhaps towards the end of the year or even in the course of the year we will be running not two-digit, but rather one-digit interest rates, which clearly signals substantial confidence in Brazil. I would also like to stress that what we did expect would happen in the second half of this year is already happening now. And I say this with a sense of modesty. And it's slowly but surely evolving. 35,300 job posts were opened or created in February after 22 months on end of negative drop. There had always been a decline in job posts as opposed to an increase. This of course is a very positive and sign of substantial optimism ahead. Moody's, the international credit ranking agency, brought us out of a negative territory and moved us up to a stable ranking territory, therefore boosting our possibility of enjoying a substantial investment grade. Again, that is clearly international acknowledgement of our efforts. So international risk or credit risk ranking agencies already recognize that the scenario in Brazil today is much more positive today. Steps such as those taken later in the year last year, such as, for example, freeing up the otherwise inactive accounts under the so-called Provident Fund of the Ministry of Labor, that means that in June, when typically millions of workers, of course, enjoy access to these accounts and are able to withdraw from them. However, if on the one hand it meets the needs of those who would otherwise have inactive accounts, it also means that we see clear-cut capital injection in the Brazilian economy, about 135, 140 billion Brazilian reals. And these are extremely positive figures. We have also enjoyed substantial support from Congress. Those of you members of the U.S. business community know all too well just how important it is to have good working relations with Congress. I mean, the U.S. is the cradle of democratic presidentialism, and of course, with congressional support, the executive can work and rule the country with support of Congress, because we do depend and hinge on Congress. In Brazil, Congress has provided us with outstanding support. It is not by chance that the so-called ceiling cap to government spending was passed. And before we took office, it was said that the first thing the government had to do was to slash on its own flesh. So what we did was we sent out a bill of law to Congress, and it was passed by a very substantial majority in Congress, not only at the lower but also at the upper house of the Brazilian parliament. So that again is clear-cut, or a clear-cut sign of the support and the positive interaction currently underway between the executive and the legislative branches of power. And the working relations have been anchored on a buzzword and a keyword in our administration, i.e. a dialogue with Congress, a dialogue with different walks of life in society, different sectors in society, as we have constantly been engaged in. And that applies to all walks of life in society. Sometimes people say, hey, Temer is only worried about the economy and public or government accounts. Not exactly. When we talk about the government ceiling cap, or cap to government spending that was passed by a majority in Congress, we of course had to follow on and through after that approval at the economic level. And that means, of course, realigning the labor legislation, which has, by the way, been the subject of an agreement as a result of much dialogue, an agreement between workers and the employers' associations. Last year, we issued a bill of law, not an amendment to the Constitution, but a bill of law, and about 7 and 8 trade union representatives spoke, as well as a few representatives of the employers' associations, to achieve an agreement. And because it is a special piece of legislation, I believe that in the very near future we will be updating and realigning the Brazilian labor legislation, which does not withdraw or take away any rights or entitlements that workers are entitled to. Not at all. We would never approve such a measure. And that is so because it is legally impossible. I mean, if you open up the chapter of the Constitution on social rights, you will see a long list of social rights. And they're not covered under ordinary law, but rather at the very structure and framework of the Brazilian state, i.e. the federal Constitution. Workers' rights are listed clearly and thoroughly, so no one would dare breach any provision of the constitutional text. And interestingly enough, social rights include, as provided for under the Constitution, social rights include a clear recognition and acceptance of labor agreements and conventions that apply. I say this because very often people say, hey, you're going to allow people to agree informally as opposed to the formal provisions of the law, so that means the workers will be subject to pressure from the employers. Well, there is a clear-cut constitutional provision to that effect. And, of course, this topic I'm talking about, i.e. acknowledgement of collective agreements and conventions, that does not mean that you're going to get all those 35 articles, subparagraphs, and provisions on labor rights to reproduce them in a collective labor convention. When the drafters of the Constitution talked about recognition of labor conventions and agreements, what they had in mind was ensuring that whatever is agreed upon will be guaranteed and ensured as a result of the free will of both sides of the production activity, i.e. workers and employers. So what the Bill of Law is aimed at, it's all about obviously providing enabling legislation to that higher level constitutional provision. And that is, of course, a step forward. And we have heard voices expressing their concerns about labor relations and related rights. But what I am saying and assuring is that the new arrangements will boost production levels, because if we have so many jobless people, the only way to encourage more job posts to be created is by, of course, stimulating the agribusiness, industrial activity, and the like, so as to ensure new job posts can be created. Where can you possibly get more job posts? In government circles? Not at all. There are too many people already working in the government. So we must, of course, provide an incentive to new job posts. Mr. Marcos Pereira has tirelessly been working to that effect. So we must, of course, have all sectors of society on board and on the same wavelength as us, so as to ensure this will not just be a political gesture on the incumbent government or the opposition, but rather a gesture to further support and ensure we are able to develop and have more jobs being created. Accordingly, on the same agenda, social security, of course, a more complex topic, but we will never breach anyone's rights or citizens' rights. Critics often say that the government wants to, of course, deprive the poor from their rights, but statistics indicate that more than 60% of current retirees get retirement benefits to their full wage level. 60% of retirees currently, of course, benefit from a minimum retirement wage as they retired. So the main issue, the crux of the matter, is not about working out the math to adjust the figures. That too is part of the equation, but rather what we further need to ensure is that there be an equal treatment among, or an equalization among the several different social security schemes that are in place. That includes members of the political class, civil servants, and workers at large, even manual labor. So the general overall social security scheme and also the privately run social security schemes or pension fund schemes. I mean, that equalization effort is absolutely key and essential. Otherwise, I must say Brazil may incur further challenges. But it will not be the case, because when I say that we may incur challenges, I'm not trying to disencourage investors, not at all. What I'm saying is that we will certainly work to ensure that the relevant reforms are passed, as we have done in the past on different matters. Of course, Congress is the sovereign voice on this matter. It will be brought to the fore as a result of a proposed constitutional amendment to go through Congress. And of course, its approval or passing depends on no one but Congress. And I'm pretty confident that it will be passed, perhaps with a few adjustments or reductions here and there, but it will be passed. I mentioned earlier our efforts to ensure resumption of higher employment levels and Moody's new credit ranking or credit rate. A clear-cut illustration are the recent auctions for airport concessions. Originally, people said that there would be no bidders. Much on the contrary, we had a lot of bidders, and they were willing to pay an outstanding premium to the airport concession arrangements. About 2 months ago, we had an auction, and again, the government achieved an extremely high premium value as a result. And likewise, in the state of São Paulo, Governor Alckmin, on the day the auction was open, he called me and he was extremely happy because the premium value had been extremely high as a result of the tender process. And that, of course, indicates that there is a clear re-emergence of trust and confidence in Brazil. I would not be bold enough to say this about 6 months ago, but I can surely say this today. So the message I wish to convey to you, ladies and gentlemen, notwithstanding whatever political challenges may be here and there, we do not, of course, ignore them, but still the message I wish to convey to you is that Brazil is following a clear-cut direction, and we will not get diverted as a result of other events. In our system, the institutional framework is very safe and sound. The executive does its work. The legislative and the judiciary each performs their role. Each branch of power organizes and puts the house in order to carry out their duties in a sense of harmony. Especially because if there is no harmony, we will be breaching the Constitution. When the drafters of the Constitution designed the, say, overall lines of the Brazilian state under the Sarney administration indicated that the powers are harmonious and independent among themselves. I often say critics saying that there is a tug of war between different branches of government, as it not so, because that would be a breach of the Constitution, because we are all here to serve the will of the people, because it is the will of the people that established the state as we know it. And the power on behalf of the state is exercised through the three different branches of power. And that is precisely what is going on in Brazil. And it is what you might describe as a re-establishment of the constitutional framework in Brazil. If legal constitutional rules are not complied with, we totally dismantle society. The good thing and the virtue about the rule of law is that it sets the rules of the game. If I hire someone, I know beforehand what the rules of the game are. If I open up a business, I know what the rules of the game are beforehand. So yes, we have a very keen sense of fiscal responsibility as shown in our actions, and hand in hand with social, or a sense of social responsibility. As I'm sure you know, Madam Siegel, there is a great deal of poverty out there in this country. So certain government-spoused or government-led programs, such as the Family Stipend Program and the lower or low-income housing program, the so-called My House, My Life program, are fully underway. Yesterday at the AmCham session, I indicated that for 2017, we have budget appropriations to ensure that 600,000 housing units be built, which is a clear-cut sign of our concern towards the poorest of the poor in society, but also a way to speed up and, of course, re-energize the civil construction sector, because we're talking about 600,000 new homes that will be built. For the poorest, we have the so-called home remodeling card, whereby citizens can approach the Federal Savings Bank if you, of course, qualify, given your income level. So the citizen is allowed to, of course, come to the Federal Savings Bank and withdraw 5,000 reals on a grant basis. Doesn't have to repay it. So that means he can pay his home, he can remodel his house, add another bathroom here, another bedroom there. But we don't just want to, of course, carry out cash transfer funds or cash transfer programs. We're moving towards land regularization programs in the urban environments. There are millions of people who live in the large centers throughout Brazil who have no address. They have no possession to their whereabouts or the place they live. Ministry of Cities has already gotten in touch with different courts of justice and notary public offices to engage in a joint effort to ensure land regularization in the large cities throughout Brazil. As regards the countryside, likewise, we are issuing title deeds to those who have benefited from a land settlement program but have remained deprived of a title deed for years on end. So we are ensuring that they will enjoy greater land assurances in the form of a title deed. So we are moving towards regularizing the overall institutional and normative framework that govern this matter in Brazil. So I have no fear of making a mistake, as I assure that you can enjoy all certainty in your upcoming investments in Brazil. You will certainly make a profit. You know, in the past, the word Petrobras, the acronym Petrobras, used to be a bad word or a somewhat ugly word, whereas today it is a beautiful word. Its market value has appreciated by 145%. I mean, can you imagine the profit levels of those who purchased Petrobras shares about a year ago? I mean, huge levels of investments percentage-wise. The Bank of Brazil, more than 100% of value appreciation. So the first thing we're doing is we are, again, waging a bet on ourselves. We are believing in the country's potential again. And our legislation, of course, provides incentives to domestic capital as well as to foreign capital. So that being the case, we want the U.S. investors and all other investors from different countries to step in and, of course, be able to sure-footedly carry out their investments and do so with a sense of confidence and security. To that end, we are slashing red tape, cutting down on bureaucracy or red tape to further facilitate the opening of new businesses willing to operate in Brazil. So again, I thank you so much for the opportunity to address you, such a distinguished audience. Greetings again to Madam Susan Segal and to all members of the audience. Let us move on and invest in Brazil, and I'm sure we will all stand to win. Thank you again.